Today we're with Dr. Jaime Montoya, who is Executive Director of the Philippine Council for Health Research Development. And sir, I'm here today to ask you about vaccines and what the President has been saying about them. And we remember that a big part of the President's public addresses are about vaccines. He says it's the only solution that can decisively end the pandemic. And so far, he's mentioned the Russian vaccine, Sputnik 5, and then the 3 Chinese vaccines being developed by Sinovac, CanSino, and Sinopharm, and also the US vaccines being developed by Moderna and Pfizer, and finally, the UK-Swedish vaccine by Oxford AstraZeneca. So the way he talks about these vaccines, it sounds like the vaccine is ready and just needs to be distributed, no? He even expressed hope that Filipinos can get back to their normal lives by December. So sir, siguro the first question would be, what's the real status of these vaccines that the President keeps mentioning? And the way he talks about the vaccines, it sounds like it will be ready by December, or that people's lives will get back to normal by December. So just the first question would be, what's the real status of these vaccines the President mentions, and what are the chances that that a vaccine will be ready by December?
Okay. If you look at the current landscape of vaccine development globally, of course, I'm talking of globally because we do not have the capacity to locally manufacture. You will be seeing at least 9 vaccine candidates which are already in phase 3 clinical trial or about to enter phase 3 clinical trials. As you also probably would realize, the phase 3 clinical trials should already be finished and the results interpreted and analyzed before they're actually given approval by their respective Food and Drug Administration groups. So having said that, if you look at the phase 3 clinical trials and how they're progressing, some of them are progressing fast, some of them are progressing not that fast. You probably are aware of the developments, for example, in the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. They had a few days suspension because of the report of one case, but they resumed again vaccination, the trial, because they found out that this development was actually coincidental and was not related to the vaccine itself. So barring that similar events will happen in any of the ongoing clinical trials, we would imagine that they would last for 3 to 6 months, meaning a short of 3 or a long of 6. So if you think about it, for example, for the Oxford vaccine, which actually started, month of July, they were already recruiting patients. You would imagine that they would be finishing at the earliest, maybe about November or December of this year. I'm talking here not only of the Oxford vaccine, but also of the US vaccines like Moderna in the US. But they have to analyze their data. You know, that will take some time also because they have to present this data in a form that will be understood by the FDA. And then they will submit it to the FDA. So that will be at least a month. Now, considering that this is an abnormal circumstances and we know that everyone needs to have the vaccine already in place, let us assume that the approval process in the FDA will only last for a month. So that means in the US or even in the UK, where these vaccines are already being manufactured and are developed, the earliest maybe the approval in the respective food and drug agencies will be first quarter of next year. Now, of course, they can submit simultaneously their FDA applications to their home country and to other countries. But the usual process is they'll have it approved first in their home country before going to other FDAs in other countries, because the other FDAs will take a longer time to review if it were the case that they did not have approval yet in their home country. So my estimate is that it will be available in the Philippines second quarter of next year. When the President said that the vaccines are available, he's actually correct. It will be available maybe in their home countries. but it is unlikely to be available in the other countries like the Philippines because, as I said, it will also take time for them to submit their applications to our FDA and for FDA to review it before it can issue an approval for the said vaccine.
Sir, how long do you think it will take our FDA to approve a vaccine from abroad? The first scenario would be if there's a FDA approval in their home country. What's the time frame for that? And the second scenario, if there's no FDA approval from their home country, how much longer will it be?
Well, actually, I am not, how do I say this? Because we are, as an agency, involved in the clinical trials approval, not in the product registration approval, I cannot comment on that timeline. What I know is for clinical trials, it is already an expedited process. Normally, it takes them 6 months to issue an approval for a trial to commence in the country, but now it takes only about 30 days or less. So it's actually expedited. But I cannot comment on whether for the product registration will also be the same because we are not the ones in charge of that. We are only in charge of the clinical trials.
So, sir, let's say that the FDA of the Philippines finally approves a vaccine. What's the next step?
The next step, if it gets approved, of course, it can now be sold in the market in the Philippines. But because of our regulatory system, and we want to ensure that even if it's available in the market, we're still following up how it behaves in the community, there will be some form of surveillance set in place in order to monitor for the experiences or how our Filipino population react to the vaccine. And because of this, again, COVID-19 situation, the FDA will actually issue some form of a monitored release. We call it a monitored release approval, which means that it can be sold in the market, but it will still have to be in a graduated fashion, meaning it may be tested or it may be used only by a limited number, not yet on a massive scale, such as what would imagine for an immunization program. And according to the Department of Health, they will actually do it on a, not immediately for everyone, but they will prioritize first on the high risk or vulnerable groups, such as healthcare workers, the elderly, and as was mentioned by the President, the poor and the disadvantaged because they cannot afford to buy the vaccine. So they have to be provided by the government.
Okay, so sir, you're saying that on one hand, there are the free vaccines which the government will distribute to these different groups, but on the other, people who can afford to buy the vaccine for themselves can go to a drugstore and purchase the vaccine. Is that correct?
Yes. The moment it is approved, it's if you can afford to buy a national program funded by government, it will also take time. So we have to make sure that the supplies are in adequately and that we're able to identify the priority groups that will receive the vaccines first. Because of course we know that the vaccines will not be available all at the same time, meaning how much we need is already there because all nations or countries will be waiting for the vaccine. So in fact, in the COVAX facility wherein we can have access to, we can only get initially 20% of our needs from that facility. The rest will have to be through individual negotiations with the vaccine developers.
Sir, 20% of our needs equals how many people who will get the vaccines? Or how many doses?
Well, it depends. For example, of our needs, let us say, I think the Department of Health has been mentioning about a threshold to be able to have what we call herd immunity. It's actually the minimum number of the population that have to be immunized or to be immune for the transmission of the virus to slow down is about 60%. So if you're talking of a, let us say, just to make the mathematics easy, have 100 million population, you're talking of 60 million people. And the 20% there is what? It's about 10 million or less. And you have to give it twice because the vaccines will be given twice, usually separated by 21 to 28 days. You have to multiply it by 2. So we have to be sure that the supply is there before we can actually start any national program.
So, sir, I was going to ask you about nga, sir, yung limited supply given the worldwide demand for these vaccines. So, sir, have we secured any, I don't know, priority access, or have we lined up for any vaccine? And do we know already, as early as now, where we are in that line for specific vaccines?
Yeah, what I can tell you is that we actually are going to participate in the COVAX facility officially, which will enable us to access at the most 20% of our needs from that facility. For the other arrangements and negotiations, I am not privy to that because, as I said, we are only in charge of clinical trials. For the procurement of vaccines and how they're going to be procured, when and how, this is actually the purview of the Department of Health.
But sir, have you heard of any updates, for example, on where we are in terms of securing access to the Chinese vaccines? Because the president already said that President Xi Jinping of China promised that we would be in the priority list. But it's a very vague promise, right? Like, we don't know, are we in fifth? How soon does that mean we can get the vaccine? So, sir, have you heard any updates on that regard?
I think there are negotiations already happening between our officials from the Philippine side and the developers in China. So the negotiations are ongoing, and this is usually through the business sector as well, and our foreign affairs, our embassies abroad. They're actually mediating and organizing these negotiations.
Are the same negotiations happening for, let's say, Moderna and Pfizer in the US, AstraZeneca, Oxford in the UK, and obviously we heard of Sputnik 5 in Russia, but for the two Western countries, are there
I think negotiations are already ongoing for most, if not all, of these vaccines that are already in advanced stages of development.
Mm-hmm. Sir, just going further into more specifically the Russian vaccine, the DOST Secretary Fortunato de la Peña mentioned that we still have to sign a data closure agreement.
No, we're finished with that already. We're now in the process of reviewing the documents. So we're already in the stage that they've already submitted the documents for review. And once they are found to be adequate and sufficient, and scientifically examined by a vaccine expert panel, it will now be reviewed also by the Ethics Review Committee before its submission to the Food and Drug Administration together with the other documents required.
Sir, may we know when Russia was able to submit this agreement, the signed agreement?
I don't remember the exact date, but sometime last week, I think. But as I said, we need to have the CDA signed before we have review of the documents and before they can give some technical details for review by the vaccine expert panel. And this is for the clinical trials.
How long would you say that the process will take, reviewing the documents and then till possible approval for the clinical
trials?
Well,
the timelines, we're supposed to do, the vaccine expert panel is supposed to do it in 2 weeks. And then the ethics review panel will probably also take that the same period, but we're planning to actually do it simultaneously. So it will be around that time, about 2 to 3 weeks.
Sir, what do you mean simultaneously? The trials?
No. Because the steps actually is the documents are submitted to the vaccine expert panel. It will be reviewed for its technical merit. And then it will be passed on to the Ethics Review Committee for its ethical review. And then once it is approved by both, it will now be submitted to the FDA for final review with the other documents.
Sir, we're on track for the October clinical trials. If, let's say, this the Russian vaccine passes the.
Yeah, I think we're on track.
Mhm.
I think we're on track because we expect the recommendations to be out by next week. Um, and of course, if the ethics review committee will be able to review it in 1 to 2 weeks, then we expect the recommendation to be in by early October. And since the FDA will be able to review it in an expedited fashion, so maybe the trials can start at the earliest late October or early November.
Mhm. Okay. What's the assurance of the government that the process that we will be subjecting the vaccine, the Russian vaccine, to will ensure that the initial fears about this Russian vaccine, that it didn't go through certain trials or that it was rushed by the Russian government? How will we address these fears through? How do we make sure we address these fears?
That is the job of the vaccine expert panel because they're not just looking at how the phase 3 clinical trial is going to be done, but they're also reviewing the data generated by the phase 1 and phase 2. Remember, before they get to the phase 3, they have to finish phase 1 and phase 2. And those are the data that the vaccine expert panel is currently reviewing, together with the protocol for the phase 3.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any ideas, sir, how we will identify volunteers for the phase 3 trials here? Or is that the Russian government's
Well,
purview?
that will be based on the protocol design that they will be submitting. But generally speaking, and it will be done in the areas where in there many cases of COVID-19, because you have to do it in an area wherein there is a transmission, ongoing transmission of the virus, because the purpose of the vaccine is really to protect from the infection. So you have to do it in an area where transmission is ongoing.
Hmm.
And this will be based on the data provided for by the Epidemiology Bureau of
Okay.
the Department of Health.
And then, sir, the president recently said that he doesn't want to pay a reservation fee to Western pharmaceutical companies, and that these companies are demanding such a fee. Could you just explain to the public what this fee is about? Is it really a reservation fee, and we really can't pay for that yet, as the president said?
Well, of course, it is our decision whether we want to give any advance payment or whatever you call it, reservation fee. But most of the companies, they call it AMC, Advanced Market Commitment. It means that they just want to be sure that the countries will be actually getting the said vaccine. And I cannot speak for the vaccine developer, but I would presume that they also need their investments to come in this early so that it can also contribute to funding the ongoing and future researches that still have to be done in order to facilitate the production and manufacture of the said vaccines.
Do our procurement laws allow us to pay that fee?
I cannot, again, you know, the procurement function is going to be done by the Department of Health. It is not actually within our purview, so I wouldn't want to comment on that because there's already a sub-technical working group in charge of procurement, and they're also developing the policies that will guide them in the process.
Then moving on, sir, to distribution. So we know that this is such a complicated task that will be ahead of us if ever a vaccine is developed safely. When you say distribution in the Philippines, for example, what would it take? Like, do we actually receive the vaccines as injections already, and then they're ready already for the.
Yeah, it's supposed to be ready for, it will be shipped to us ready for administration. Of course, very important here is the cold chain. We call it the cold chain because most of these vaccines will have to be kept in a well-maintained container. I mean, as far as temperature is concerned. So usually 4 to 8 degrees, they have to be maintained. But of course, it even be lower depending on the type of vaccine that is going to be delivered. And yes, it has to come here, as I said, in a contained environment to ensure that they're stable and viable. before it gets to the consumers and to the population who will receive the immunization.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, sir, when you mentioned that the vaccine will arrive here, you expect second quarter of 2021. That means that the current situation where we have quarantines and all these health protocols, they will persist till then, till that time that we get the vaccine here.
Yes, yes, of course. The minimum, we call it the minimum health standards, will still have to be in place until such time that the number of cases of COVID-19 have gone down significantly. And in fact, even with the vaccine, I don't see that the minimum health standards will be removed because we still have to be guided by the number of cases before we can even make any recommendation as to whether we're going to reduce some of the requirements or not.
Mm-mm. Because the expectation will be once a vaccine is here, people might think, if there's a vaccine, the active cases will start going down and the new daily cases reported.
The effect is not immediate, by the way.
Mm-mm.
So yes, you have the vaccine. Yes, you may be protected. But of course, we still have to see whether the protection, well, first of all, whether you will have the antibodies and whether the antibodies will be sufficiently high enough and if it will last for a long time. Again, there are now speculations coming from the, and of course, suggestions from the scientific groups that maybe the vaccines will have to be given every year or every 2 to 3 years. We don't know. That will depend on how long the antibodies will persist.
Mm-hmm. Sir, how long do you think it will take for a vaccine to take effect in a significant way that will allow us to lift certain quarantine measures and minimum health standards?
Well, just like what we're doing now, all of our measures are dependent on the effects, on what is currently happening. So we will still look at maybe the number of cases seen, the number of new cases seen, the doubling rates, how fast the cases double, and how many cases end up in the hospital, whether we're able to meet the demands. All of these factors I think we have to be considered in order to make adjustments in whatever measures are in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And sir, last question. It was also during this administration when Filipinos developed a fear of vaccines. And it was mainly because of the Dengvaxia controversy. How do you think the government can encourage Filipinos to get vaccinated for COVID-19 given this fear?
There is a parallel activity that's already being done by the Department of Health together with the other agencies involved in the immunization program, so as to ensure that the public will have sufficient information on all of the vaccines that are going to be used, why vaccination is important, what are the possible effects of such vaccines on the population. So it's generating awareness on the people, and we think that it is very important because you have to build public confidence on the vaccines so that they will be able to accept it. And that's already being started by there's a separate group in charge of media advocacy and publicity for vaccine awareness so that the public will appreciate how important vaccines are in addressing the current problems we're facing with COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya, for sharing your insights with our viewers. Again, this has been P. Renada, and you've been watching Rappler Talk.